At 35,000 feet, the aircraft is exactly where it's supposed to be, high above the weather, cruising smoothly, crossing hundreds of miles every hour. Then, something changes. The engine noise drops away. In the cockpit, the pilots can see it immediately. The aircraft still has speed, it still has height, it still responds to the controls, but both engines have stopped giving it thrust. For passengers, this sounds like the nightmare version of flying. If both engines fail, surely the plane just falls. But it does not. And the reason is what makes the scenario so strange. At cruise altitude, the aircraft has not run out of options, it has run out of push. It can no longer keep cruising normally, it cannot climb away, it cannot simply continue to its destination, but it can still be flown. So from this moment, the question changes. Not where was this flight supposed to go, but where can the aircraft still reach? And before we go any further, there is one important thing to understand. This scenario is extremely rare. Modern airliners are not built on the assumption that everything will work perfectly. They are built on the assumption that something might fail. That is why losing one engine on a twin-engine passenger jet is serious, but usually manageable. The flight changes immediately. The crew run the procedure. The aircraft normally diverts. Passengers may hear an announcement, and emergency services may meet the aircraft when it lands. But the plane is not helpless. It still has one working engine, and that makes all the difference. With one engine still running, the aircraft still has thrust. Less thrust than normal, obviously, and less performance, but it is still in powered flight. This is not a lucky accident. It is part of how modern airliners are designed, certified, and operated. A twin-engine jet has to be able to handle an engine failure at some of the worst possible moments. During takeoff, there is a point where the aircraft is going too fast to stop safely on the runway. After that point, if one engine fails, the aircraft must still be able to continue the takeoff and climb away on the remaining engine. That does not mean pilots casually take off with one engine. It means the aircraft has to be designed so that if an engine fails at the critical moment, the crew still have a safe path forward. This is also why twin-engine aircraft can fly long routes over oceans and remote areas. When a twin-engine jet crosses the Atlantic, the plan is not simply to hope both engines keep working. The route is planned around diversion airports. The aircraft has to meet strict reliability standards. The crew have procedures. The airline has maintenance requirements, and the aircraft must be capable of continuing safely if one engine fails. So when people ask, what happens if one engine fails over the ocean? The answer is not panic. The answer is the possibility is already built into the system. The aircraft diverts, the pilots follow the procedure, and the remaining engine keeps the aircraft flying. But this video is about the rarer situation. What if the backup is gone too? What if both engines fail? Because that is when everything changes. With one engine failed, the aircraft still has powered flight. With both engines failed, there is no thrust from either side. The aircraft is still moving forward, but nothing is pushing it anymore. And that is the part people often misunderstand. A passenger jet without thrust does not drop vertically from the sky. It still has forward speed. Air is still moving over the wings. The controls still work. The pilots can still guide it. But the plane cannot stay level. Without thrust, the aircraft has to descend to keep moving forward. In simple terms, it becomes a glider. Not a light, graceful glider. A huge, heavy, fast glider carrying hundreds of people descending from cruise altitude. And at 35,000 feet, height is the most valuable thing the aircraft has. That height gives the pilots time to understand what has happened, coordinate with air traffic control, look for a suitable airport, and try to recover the engines. Not unlimited time, but enough time for the emergency to become a decision-making problem, not just an immediate reaction. This is why the same failure can be completely different depending on when it happens. If both engines fail just after takeoff, the crew may only have moments to choose a landing site. At cruise altitude, they may have many minutes. That does not make it safe in the normal sense. It is still a major emergency, but it gives the crew something incredibly important: options. And the first option is always the same: fly the aircraft. Pilots are trained around a simple priority: aviate, navigate, communicate. Aviate means keep the aircraft under control. Navigate means work out where it can go. Communicate means talk to air traffic control, the cabin crew, and when there is time, the passengers. That order matters, because in an emergency, the first job is not to explain the problem. It is not to choose the perfect airport. It is not to make the cabin feel calm. It is to keep the aircraft flying. In a two-pilot cockpit, one pilot will usually focus on controlling the aircraft. The other will work through the problem, speak to air traffic control, and help decide what happens next. They need to understand the type of failure they are dealing with, because engine failure can mean several different things. Sometimes an engine flames out. That means combustion inside the engine has stopped, but the engine may still be physically intact. If the conditions are right, it may be possible to restart it. Other times, the engine is damaged. If birds, debris, or an internal mechanical problem have caused serious damage, restarting it may not be realistic. Fuel problems are different again. If fuel is not reaching the engines because of a system issue, restoring fuel flow might help. But if the aircraft has actually run out of usable fuel, there is nothing left to burn. So the crew are asking a series of urgent questions. Was it fuel? Was it damage? Was it icing? Was it volcanic ash? Was it a temporary flameout? Can either engine be restarted? And while that is happening, the aircraft is still descending. That is what makes the situation so demanding. The pilots are not only trying to solve the engine problem, they are trying to solve it while the aircraft's height is gradually disappearing. But the engines do more than push the aircraft forward, they also help power it. On a normal flight, the engines provide electrical and hydraulic power for many aircraft systems. If both engines fail, some of that normal power supply can be affected. That sounds alarming, but modern airliners have backup systems for exactly this reason. There are batteries for essential power. There may be an auxiliary power unit, or APU, which is a small engine usually located in the tail. It does not push the aircraft through the sky, but it can provide electrical power. Some aircraft also have a ram air turbine. This is a small emergency turbine that can deploy into the airflow and generate power as the aircraft moves forward. The point is not to keep the cabin experience normal. The point is to preserve what matters most: flight instruments, radios, essential controls, the information the pilots need to keep flying and land the aircraft. So in the cockpit, the emergency is not one single action. It is several things happening at once. The aircraft has to be flown. The problem has to be diagnosed. The engines may need restart attempts. Emergency power may need to be restored. Air traffic control needs to know what is happening, and the crew need to find a place to land. This is where cruise altitude makes the story more reassuring than most people expect. From high altitude, a passenger jet can travel a long way without thrust. The exact distance depends on the aircraft, its weight, its speed, the weather, and how it is configured. But the basic idea is simple. It will follow a descending path, trading height for forward distance. At 35,000 feet, that descending path can cover a significant area. That means the crew may have more than one possible airport to consider. But not every airport on the map is useful. A suitable airport needs to be reachable. It needs enough runway. The weather needs to be acceptable. The wind matters, terrain matters, the aircraft's height and speed matter. And there is one more issue. With no engine thrust, there may be no go-around. On a normal landing, if the approach is not right, pilots can add thrust, climb away, and try again. With both engines failed, they will not have that option. So the approach has to be judged very carefully. The pilots need to arrive with enough speed to keep the aircraft controllable, but not so much speed that it cannot stop. They need to be high enough to reach the runway, but not so high that they cannot land on it. They need to line up correctly, configure the aircraft, and manage the descent without the usual ability to add power. And this creates a counterintuitive point. In a no-thrust landing, being slightly high and fast can sometimes be better than being too low and too slow. If the aircraft is a little high, pilots may have ways to lose height. They can use drag, they can lower the landing gear, they can use flaps, they can adjust the flight path. After touchdown, they can use spoilers, brakes, and runway length. But if the aircraft gets too low and too slow before reaching the landing area, there may be no easy way to fix it. No thrust means no simple recovery. This is why the pilots are not just asking, where is the nearest runway? They are asking, which runway can we actually reach, line up with, and stop on? And if no runway can be reached, the question becomes even more serious. What is the most survivable place to put the aircraft? That could be open terrain, it could be a field, it could be water. It depends entirely on the situation. The famous example is US Airways Flight 1549. That aircraft lost thrust in both engines after a bird strike shortly after takeoff from New York. The crew were at low altitude with very little time. They decided they could not safely return to an airport, so they ditched the aircraft in the Hudson River. Everyone on board survived. That case is often remembered as a water landing. But the deeper lesson is about decision making. The crew did not choose the Hudson because it was ideal. They chose it because, in that moment, it was the safest place they could realistically reach. A cruise altitude failure would usually be a very different scenario. At 35,000 feet, The crew has more height, more time, and more possible airports. But the same principle applies. The safest landing place is not always the nearest one. It is the best one the aircraft can actually reach. Another famous case is Air Transat Flight 236. That aircraft lost power from both engines over the Atlantic after a fuel leak, then glided to an airbase in the Azores. Again, this is an extraordinary emergency, but it shows the same basic point. Even when both engines stop producing thrust, the aircraft does not instantly become uncontrollable. It can still be flown. The outcome depends on height, speed, aircraft systems, crew decisions, and the landing options available. So, what would passengers notice if this happened at cruise altitude? At first, perhaps less than they expect. There may be a change in engine noise. The seatbelt sign would come on. The aircraft may begin descending. The cabin crew would stop normal service and begin preparing the cabin. Passengers might not immediately know exactly what has happened, and that lack of information can be frightening. But it does not mean nothing is happening. It means the crew are prioritizing. The pilots need to fly the aircraft, understand the problem, and make a plan before they can explain it clearly. If there is enough time, passengers may hear an announcement that the aircraft is diverting. The cabin crew may secure loose items, check seatbelts, and prepare passengers for an emergency landing. If the situation requires it, passengers may be told to brace. That is the part people would feel most directly. Not the engine instruments, not the cockpit checklist, not the conversations with air traffic control. But the cabin suddenly becomes serious. The descent, the instructions, the sense that the flight has changed. But that seriousness is not a sign that the aircraft is helpless. It is a sign that the system is working. The pilots are flying the aircraft. Air traffic control is clearing space and preparing support. The cabin crew are protecting the passengers. Emergency services are getting ready on the ground. If the aircraft reaches a runway, the landing may feel different from a normal one. It may be firm. The braking may be heavy. The aircraft may stop on the runway with emergency vehicles approaching. Passengers may be told to stay seated while the crew assess the situation. That is because the emergency is not automatically over the moment the wheels touch down. The crew still need to know if there is smoke, fire, fuel leaking, damaged engines, or overheated brakes. They need to decide whether evacuation is safer than keeping everyone on board. Sometimes evacuating immediately is the right decision. Sometimes staying seated while emergency crews inspect the aircraft is safer. That decision matters too. So should this be something you worry about every time you fly? No. Both engines failing on a modern airliner is extremely rare. Commercial aviation is not safe because failures are impossible. It is safe because aircraft are designed, tested, maintained, and operated around the possibility that something might fail. One engine failure is built into the system. Aircraft are certified around engine outperformance. Long-distance routes are planned around diversion airports. Pilots train for failures. Air traffic control and emergency services are part of the response. And modern jet engines are highly reliable. So the realistic answer is this. If one engine fails, the aircraft is designed to keep flying. If both engines fail, the aircraft is in a serious emergency, but it does not fall like a stone. At cruise altitude, it still has height, it still has speed, it still has control. The pilots may have time to restart the engines, restore essential systems, choose an airport, prepare the cabin, and land. The situation is rare, it is serious, but it is not the same as the aircraft becoming uncontrollable. So what happens if both engines fail? The aircraft becomes a glider. The pilots keep flying it. Then they try to recover the engines. They restore the systems they can. They choose the best reachable landing place. And they use the height and the speed they have left to get the aircraft safely back to the ground. That is the remarkable thing about modern aviation. It is not built around pretending failures cannot happen. It is built around a much more serious question. If something does fail, what happens next?